Hello, today we're trying another form of new content, React content. This video was sent to me by one of my viewers, who I really appreciate, and so I think we're just going to watch it. I watched about 1 minute so far, but except for that I'm going in cold, and well, we're in my relaxed room, not playing Minecraft today. Let's see what Piers Morgan has to say.
Welcome back to Piers Morgan Uncensored. Well, model Emily Ratajkowski, one of my favourite dimwits, sparked controversy recently by claiming that getting divorced before 30 is chic.
So it seems that a lot of ladies are getting divorced before they turn 30. And as someone who got married at 26, has been separated for a little over a year, 32, I don't think there's anything better. If there is nothing better than being in your 30s, still being hot, maybe having a little bit of your own money, figuring out what you want to do with your life. For all of those people who are stressed or feeling stressed about that, about being divorced, like it's good. Congratulations.
It's like,
All right, so I mean, that's an unfortunate pause. I shouldn't be doing this to him. I didn't do it on purpose. Anyways, well, I mean, he's starting it off kind of weirdly. I guess he doesn't like her. I don't really know anything about her, but kind of framing her as a dimwit already is kind of tainting his views in a specific way. Not really knowing anything about it. I think she's kind of going for alleviating anxiety of people who are divorced, because of course in Western society, which is very influenced by Christian morality, divorce is seen as something very bad. But I think you really have to judge on a case-by-case basis whether a divorce is a problem for you or not. I mean, ultimately, maybe you made a mistake. Maybe you and your partner just don't fit anymore, and then it can be better to be divorced than not. And I think like feeling anxiety about this and it's like I ruined my life or something like that, it's not a good way to approach it. So on the whole, I think like what she's saying makes some sense to me. She's not really saying that people who are married in their 30s or women who are married in their 30s are like worse or something like that. I guess it's kind of trying to be pitted against each other, but I'm not really seeing that from that clip. Let's see where he's going with it.
congratulations. God, she's ridiculous. Well, divorce is certainly becoming more common, and marriage itself is becoming a fierce frontier in the raging culture wars. On the one side, there are feminists rejecting a dated concept. On the other, so-called TradWives, who think it binds our societies together. Well, TradWives spend their days dutifully cooking and cleaning while their husbands go to work. Esther Williams, who's a 25-year-old TradWife, has amassed hundreds of thousands of followers by showing off her TradWife life online. She even gave up her job to be the perfect wife. So is she and others like her saving society? Or are they selling out the sisterhood? Well, joining me now is
I mean, this again is an odd framing, right? Like making up this dichotomy between tradwives, a trend on TikTok, and like people, I guess women going their own way, kind of not dating at all. Another trend, which I think is not reflective of like greater society, making up this kind of gulf between them and pointing them as the two choices. I mean, I think there can be a lot said about TradWives, and we kind of went into this in a recent video with my guest, Sancti. But I don't know. I mean, I think ultimately, like the vast majority of people are still trying to date, and they're probably not looking to have like either of these extremes as they are posed. Although I would say like if we talk about like the TradWife TikTok trend, which is like these women portraying an image of like really idyllic staying at home and taking care of your family and your husband, which I mean, if you want to do that, if you can afford it, and if you go into it open-eyed, that might be fine for you. But it's not really a realistic proposal for most people. While on the other side, like people, I don't know if it's feminists per se or just people who are a little bit burned out on dating, say like, well, I don't need, especially women, I don't need a man or a partner. I mean, all of this is quite heteronormative, but we can talk about it in that framing. I don't think that's really a problem. We leave the gays out of it for now, and the NBs. Yeah, I don't know if that's really like a reasonable thing to make as a pose as a fight against each other. But either way, I mean, I don't want to talk too much, and I don't know where this is going to be going anyways, because there might be some more opinions by the people who are on it. But this is my first thoughts, just hearing this kind of framing.
Wife and influencer Esther Williams, and in the studio the socialist and author Grace Blakely and YouTuber Pearl Davis. This might be the best lineup in the history of television for a debate of this nature. So I'm very excited. All right, Esther Williams, let's start with you as the trad wife. Sell it to me. Why do you think we should all go back to having trad wives in marriages?
Well, I believe that I actually don't believe that everyone should be a traditional wife. I think that it is a choice, and I think it's a lovely choice if a woman wants to simply be a wife and a mother, and that's enough for her. And it's a simple way of living with traditional gender roles. It's balanced, and we don't have to do it all as women. I think we've proven that it's possible, but at what cost, right?
Right, and in terms of what being a trad wife involves, what do you think it means to be a trad wife?
Well, to adhere to traditional gender roles. So what I mean by that is the husband, he is the provider of the home. He goes out, he works, and he knows how to protect his family if need be. And the wife, she's the homemaker. She does the cooking, she does the cleaning, and she takes care of the home and children if there are any, and herself, of course. So it's adhering to traditional gender roles.
Okay, Grace, I'm sure.
Yeah, okay. So I mean, she kind of started off sort of saying what I was saying. It's like more about a choice, and it's not really this. She's not trying to convince people to want to do that. While I guess Piers Morgan was kind of more trying to pit them, to kind of create this unnecessary fight. I would assume that is probably also why Pearl Davis is on this panel to create controversy. But yeah, so I think like what you're saying about like if you choose to abide by these traditional gender roles, like on a individual basis, this is maybe okay. It might send a sort of, I mean, like a lot of feminists would say, like the personal is political, and to some degree this is true. But if this is an arrangement that you're willing to have, and you're also aware of the problems that can come with this and the power imbalances that might be a personal choice, that's all right. But looking at it more from a broader economic standpoint, like it's obviously not feasible for a lot of people, because like a single income cannot really provide these kind of idyllic home lives for most people. So even if you buy this traditional gender value, traditional gender norms, which is a relatively new phenomenon anyways, and this kind of middle class ideal of American life, not really how people used to live. But let's say you want this kind of, you know, like the kind of way that like Fallout makes it seem that the 60s were before the nukes dropped, I guess. That if you want that kind of life, it's just not possible in the current economic situation where one income cannot provide this. So you will need to, like, both partners will need to work, and then you already don't have this kind of split in terms of domestic versus paid labor, I guess. And yeah, I mean, I think that the other thing is that we're kind of talking about when we talk about TikTok influencers, they're obviously more selling something. It's like advertisement, right? Ultimately, like it's kind of like my YouTube channel too, right? I'm trying to convince you. I'm trying to make something happen. This is not really an something that's happening in a vacuum, right? Like I have an ideology, like the people who make these TikTok videos might have an ideology, or at least they're kind of like trying to create some sort of value, right? Like this woman, I forgot her name, but she's like a very big influencer, right? She's making a lot of money, potentially. I don't know her husband, like, but potentially someone with that many followers makes way more money, way more money than anyone working a traditional job. And so, like, she might be making homemaking content, but really it's her job, and she's bringing in a massive income that can then also provide for or like provide for making this kind of decision of staying at home. So I think it's just a bit more complicated if you look at it from this kind of point of view. And I guess the feminist critique, although I might be preempting the next guest there, is that you kind of like these traditional gender roles were chains particularly on women, but of course the men were also like trapped in them, perhaps with a little bit more freedom in what they were allowed to do in terms of the greater world. Obviously a little bit more power, and obviously then also like control as the head of the house, the patriarch. So like I guess if you had to have a deal, usually you'd probably choose the male role because you can just it's more usually more fulfilling for if you have ambitions. Although that's obviously not how people can think about this in a situation like this. But either way, like a society where people can follow what they want, and if they want like to stay at home, if they want to be a stay-at-home dad, for example, that is an option too. So completely untraditional gender norms is probably better. Say we have a society where one income can provide for a whole family again, but women are free to pursue if they want a job, if they want to, if they have like a career that they are looking for, and a man is much more, well, I prefer to take care of children or bake at home, do domestic labor or care work, which is very important work also for the reproduction of society. It's better if like these people can choose this rather than be like, well, all women are like this, all men are like this, which is just obviously not quite true. I mean, definitely not. I mean, we can see that now a lot of women do desire to follow career paths and have dreams in that realm, the societal and economic realm, rather than just the domestic. And just isn't meant to be as a diminutive there, but as like there's also other options. So let's see what the other ones are saying. I've been rambling a little bit.
You thoroughly agree with this, don't you?
Look, I mean, what Esther's just said about the fact that women should be able to choose, obviously I completely agree. And, men should be able to choose as well. I think the feminist critique of traditional gender roles and gender ideology isn't that some people like to stay at home and others don't. It's that you shouldn't be bound to pursue a certain life based on the sex that you were born into at birth. The one issue I do have is I know actually a friend of mine whose sister got involved in the TradWife movement in the US, basically. She was quite young. She got married to someone who was like, this is what we're doing. You're going to be a TradWife. and basically came to regret it. She felt like she'd been controlled, like her life became very small, and she couldn't get out. She couldn't escape because, you know, she'd lost all her friends, and this has become basically her entire life. And it concerns me that sometimes we see this narrative on social media that women have to be a certain way in order to get a husband. So you have to be this like particular model of femininity for people to love you. And I think that's really sad, because I don't think anyone should have to shave off any parts of themselves to be loved or to you know, find a husband or, you know, anything like that.
All right, Pearl.
Yeah, I mean, I guess she sort of made like a bunch of the points that I made, which I think is not surprising because, you know, I come from this also from a bit of a feminist point of view and the leftist critique of this movement. So let's see where it goes after this.
What do you think?
I think it's a good that we're seeing a return to traditionalism. Yeah, I think it's a good thing.
How
I don't know.
How is the feminist movement of the last few decades? How has it gone for you? I mean, when you look at it and see how women have progressed, do you think it's been largely a force for good, or do you think, as the TradWives do, that perhaps we've lost that sense of gender rules, for want of a better phrase, which actually work very well for many people?
I mean, we've seen families disappear. You know, I saw a study the other day that said only 25% of, I mean, this is an American stat, but American households have families. So I guess there's positives and there's negatives, but it's like at what cost, you know?
What to you?
150 years ago, the average woman had 7 kids, 85% of people were married.
I mean,
You know,
there was also much higher infant mortality.
I mean, I feel like there wasn't very much meat to what to say there, I guess. I mean, I assume the feminist woman is going to answer very similarly, but I mean, just having a family and a lot of children in itself is not good, I think, right? Like it's kind of like presupposes that this is a good thing, and so showing that this is not happening as much anymore is a bad thing. But I don't think you've really proven this, right? Having working families like that work for everyone who's involved, with happy adults and happy children, and like positive outcomes is like really what you want. And I'm not sure that if we look at America from 150 years ago, that the situation for these families was necessarily as good as it is for families or single people in our current society. And I think we would have to like compare on a much broader scale this point.
And women died very young, and you know.
I mean, women were more depressed than ever before. We're on antidepressants.
I mean, there are a lot of
women over the age of 45 are the least happy demographic.
There are a lot of very
complex
reasons for that.
Well,
I think
and the issue you have is women like Emily Ratajkowski. You know, marriage. Again, I've said this before. Marriage isn't marriage anymore. The average marriage is 7 years. We have things like no-fault divorce, leave if you're unhappy. So
what does that mean? Marriage isn't marriage anymore? Because there have been so many marriages over the course of history where people have been.
Okay, I mean, kind of going in there, it was like a lot of stuff now that was just like rattled off. I mean, if we talk about antidepressants and we're talking about 150 years ago, I mean, there weren't any. So it's kind of like, who knows whether people were more or less depressed, right? Like, I mean, there's definitely been a lot more awareness for mental health now. I mean, if you were depressed in the 50s and you don't have like many words for it, or like the solution is a lobotomy, right? Like, I mean, it's a very different situation to now, where we're willing to talk about these kind of feelings and problems. And I'm not sure that like women like Emily Ratajkowski, I guess she's a model or an actress, are to blame for any sort of depression wave that we might have. I would like probably look much more at economic situations, and rather than like this kind of like, I wouldn't say like glamorous Hollywood in the 50s and 60s was the reason that there wasn't as much depression. If there wasn't as much depression, like I think this like I said, I think this is very hard to compare. And now it's probably not TikTok and YouTube stars that are to blame for more depression. At least I think like if they have a part to play, it's probably a relatively minor one.
Very unhappy. Either the man or the woman has been very unhappy, and they've been forced basically to stay in a marriage. It could have been an abusive marriage. It could have been an emotionally abusive marriage. And that would, we have one life. Why would you spend it with someone who doesn't make you happy?
Marriage was about duty, and this is the problem we have with women. Like men tend to be better people than us. Yeah, they really do. They tend to. No. They tend to do the right thing.
I mean, I guess like this is the kind of thing that that gets the views, right? Like that's probably why she gets put on by Piers Morgan. I don't know if she still gets it. Like I haven't really seen much of that. It seems to be gone around like a year ago or whatever when this was. I didn't say anything about the no-fault divorce, but this is actually a bit of a worry I have that no-fault divorce is something that the right wing in the US particularly is trying to undermine. And like having no-fault divorce is actually a positive win for mostly women, right? Like because women were economically and stuck kind of before. But like I guess in this case it's not economically, but they were like actually legally stuck in a lot of ways, and they would have to prove to a court whether it's possible to have like a reason to divorce. And I do think like that puts a lot of hurdles on like abusive relationships or on just like dysfunctional relationships. And you can see people like Steven Crowder who clearly abused his wife, like in this video, also advocating against no fault divorce. I don't think that no fault divorce also is like you can see this as any sort of reason for the problems we're facing as a society today. Like staying in these kind of dysfunctional families was probably not positive, neither for the people who are in them, the adults in them, nor like for any children that are in these relationships. So I don't know. It's kind of a weird assault. And then what she's saying that like men tend to be better people than women. I mean, it's just like the soundbite that she's going for. I mean, I guess she's referring that most divorces are initiated by women, but I mean, I feel like again this is kind of presupposing that that's a bad thing, and so therefore it has to be that women are bad. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure what the argument is. I feel like this is probably more of just a random thing to throw out, right? And like from my worldview, I really think like people are quite similar, and obviously like in terms of socialization, there are big differences. And then if you talk about good and bad, you have to like decide what you really want. But like if you talk, for example, about like violence and crime, obviously this is much more perpetrated by men. So in terms of that, like the socialization seems to make men worse. Again, that's neither here nor there. You're like kind of looking at a tiny little sliver of the world and are trying to deduce massive statements from this. Like it's a bit pointless in a way.
They
are a much maligned species. I agree.
I mean, there's a reason we have phrases like a man of his word, right?
Yeah.
Not a woman of her word. Because men will actually stick things out. Women, when shit gets hard, we just leave. And you're proving my point. What was your first answer? My happiness, right?
Of course. Like, everyone deserves to be happy. Everyone deserves to be loved.
The family doesn't work when it's about you. It's supposed to be about your kids.
Well,
and that's the problem in modern.
Everyone. There's a balance and a compromise in relationships. Am I allowed to talk now?
Okay, go ahead.
Look, I think relationships are about balance. They're about compromise. They're about
I mean, that's again well, like one of those weird things. Like a man of his word is kind of like meaningless, right? Like, I mean, you could just as well say it's like, well, why do we need this phrase? Perhaps it's because women always keep the word. The man of his word is a special thing. I don't know. It's like a silly, just a silly argument that you can throw out in the moment. Well, what was the other point? I already forgot because it was so silly. Oh, okay, yeah. So families are about children. Well, I mean, I don't know if this is actually true, right? Like, um, I think like I'm listening to the sociologist who's kind of talking about like families should be more defined as groups of intergenerational units that come together, which may have like blood ties, which I think is probably what Pearl would exclusively talk about, but they might also have other like bindings in a way, right? And that's kind of what it's about. So in a way, she makes a point that the intergenerational part of like kids, parents, grandparents is what makes a family in that sense. Like I said, we can abstract this, and it's just like different ages working together to get positive outcomes. But so it's kind of like in all directions, right? Like kids need, of course, a lot of taking care of by what we call families, by their parents, by obviously also by society nowadays, right? Like um, you need like not just schools, but like the whole environment is what shapes a kid, and gives them the best chance. And I think like this is kind of like also what people know, right? But then we're kind of also talking about divorce rates of people who come together and might not even have children. So we're kind of mixing in a lot of different things in together here.
Knowing, understanding yourself, learning to, know and understand another person. Eventually, potentially, if you want to, bringing children into the world and teaching them how to do that as well. Teaching them to balance a sense of their own identity with the love that they have for another person. And, for example, I know an older woman, actually, who's a friend of our family, who got divorced at about 60. She had, this lovely family. They were together since they were 18. And she said, I got to a point after I'd stopped being a mother and, I was just kind of getting on, I realized I'd lost my sense of who I was. And I didn't really feel like I knew who I was anymore because I'd always just been a wife and a mother. And I wanted to go out and explore that. And I think that's fantastic. Good for her.
What is traditionalism?
I don't know what you think traditionalism is.
I would say a modern mentality is me before the family. I would say traditionalism is the family before me, especially in women.
You're onto something.
And so.
I mean, it is kind of interesting again, right? Like she's. I mean, the anecdote of the by that feminist woman, Grace Blakely, I see her name. I mean, I think she's right. Like, I mean, people have like their own lives to live, and they should do that with an empathetic way. But if they only look out for others, they might. It's not good for them, and it's possibly also not good for the others if the person they are relying on is not like a fully happy person, The thing about the traditionalism, I think what Pearl is saying there is kind of interesting, right? Because before she was saying it's like, oh, men are just better people, but traditionalism is like women need to put like the families before them, especially women. Like, don't even talk about the men. I mean, I guess she might say it's like, oh, they just naturally do that, even though, I mean, I don't think we can see this from statistics of like, men abandoning, for example, their wives in cancer, and if they have a cancer diagnosis at much higher rates or these kind of things. It's like, I'm not sure that men naturally put families first. But yeah, so what do you think of this definition she's putting putting there that like modernism is people putting themselves first, and traditionalism people putting families first. It's kind of an interesting framing to me, because I do think like this kind of individualism is something that we can criticize. I wouldn't pose it as like this modern versus traditional kind of thing, because I don't think that necessarily it was better before, although like there are forces at play that made it much more necessary before to form these coherent groups to survive, right? Like if there is no framework of a state, if perhaps you cannot open a bank account like because you're a woman, you rely on a man, or like in England, you're basically the property of your man. You're just like kind of forced by the legal framework to abide by this, and that doesn't necessarily get like better outcomes. While now we have this kind of ability for people to be individuals, and perhaps something gets lost if we cannot also further like this kind of communal or family ties at the same time. But I think we're just looking like there's these kind of rose-tinted glasses about like families were good and there was never a problem, and now individuals are just like would only care for themselves, and that's the big problem we have in society. And I'm not sure if this is like actually an accurate description of everything that's going on.
Actually, it's interesting you said 60-year-olds, because, you know, I've interviewed 600, 700 people roughly in the past year and a half. I've done hundreds of shows interviewing people about relationships. And what I find is the 60-year-olds a lot of those women led their daughters astray. You know, there's a reason we're in this mess, right? A lot of those women had the wrong mentality when it came to marriage, and had exactly the mentality that you're talking about.
Which is that one should prioritize balancing one's own sense of identity with compromise and relationship with someone else.
Myself before the marriage.
But that's, again,
and it's really unfortunate, because I would say the women of our generation really are suffering because of the advice of the women of the past.
There's an interesting point here, right, which is that we do live in a very individualistic society, and we're all told, actually, I think a lot of the time, in our relationships as well, you have to be a certain way if you want to receive love. You have to abide by these norms. Yeah. You have to be a certain level of attractiveness. You have to earn a certain amount of money. It's all about you. And that's not what love is.
All right,
love is
all right, listen, it's actually been very interesting listening to this. Let me bring it back in Esty. So Esty...
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just like continued on on that aspect. I don't know if like 60-year-old women are to blame for our the woes in society. It's all like these blanket statements. I mean, I don't usually watch these kind of things. I don't think they're particularly conducive to thinking about something. Actually, let me know what you think, like with me reacting to it, if this is like a positive thing, if it helps you in some way. If you have like some ideas, please put them in the comments. But like these are very shallow kind of I don't know, like it's obviously made for entertainment rather than for really thinking about something. They throw out a bunch of like short sentences that you might be like, okay, yeah, I guess I see this, I see that, but it's just like not. I mean, read a book, I guess. Like this is my thing. Like instead of this, I wish I had read a bit in a book and had like a much more fulfilling thought, I guess. Let me see. Is there anything that she said I could even like jump off of? I guess. Oh, here's one thing that I was thinking about. There is this economist, I forgot her name. She won the Nobel Prize 2 years ago now, 1 year, I forget. But like one argument that she makes in terms of like what Pearl was saying is kind of interesting, because she's saying like, oh, these women are to blame, these 60-year-old women, for giving us the wrong ideas. They're them first, etc. You know, they're always thinking just about themselves. And like she's kind of saying that like one of the reasons why there's a massive gender gap in terms of pay and these kind of things is actually that these women that Pearl is referring to did not anticipate how much economic freedom they would have compared to their mothers. And so there is a gap because they were unable to execute on this kind of possibilities that they had because they were unaware, right? Like how society was going to unfold. And she kind of talks about this on a statistical level and tries to compare it as what's her book called? If I remember, I'll put it in the what's it called? The doobly-doo. Block Brothers. Okay. She's kind of saying that like this is one of the reasons why this gap exists. I mean, the other thing that you look at in sociology is that there's like actually more of a gap for motherhood. Like if you become a mother, then like your earnings potential goes down and never really recovers, and you might be like if things go well, you'll be fine, but if things go badly, you'll be very poor in old age. So this is another way to look at this, which I haven't yet been able to bring together. So I'm not 100% sure if these two frameworks contradict each other or they just go together. But either way, you get what I'm saying though. Like she's basically saying women in the I'm just going to paint with really broad strokes here, but like women before the war, let's say before the war, like didn't really have many options, right? And then afterwards, like 50s, 60s, and mostly talking about US, but also like I guess Western countries generally are pretty similar in this regard, perhaps on a different time scale. Had actually options to work and find real careers, right? But because they didn't know, they might not have like invested in education as much. They might not have pursued this. They might have still like gotten children much sooner than they would have had they known what their options could have been. And so this kind of difference in earnings in power basically is in large parts to these decisions that these actors made under false assumptions. It's an interesting, like the good thing about this too is I think it's more palatable to a lot of people to view it this way, because we're like the economists like this kind of homo economicus, we're making all these rational decisions, and if they're like, oh, they made these decisions on the wrong assumption, it's kind of like, oh, I get that, rather than being like there are structures that keep women down, which in my opinion also exist, right? Like that there are problems in that regard too. Feminists make a reasonable critique there. But yeah, so it's definitely an interesting point of view, and I mean she got a Nobel Prize for it. So I guess like in this sense, this was a nice jumping off point, even though it's a little bit unrelated to what was discussed. Let's see where else this is going. It's kind of going long, right? Like I mean, I talk a lot and pause. It's an interesting format. Do people do this a lot? I'm really a little bit lost.
In terms of trad values, like my wife puts the bins out, for example, right? I've never asked her to. She's just adopted that role in our house. So I never put the bins out. I don't know if I should feel ashamed of myself. I do other stuff, but I don't put the bins out. As a trad wife, do you put your bins out? Is that part of the gender rule of the 50s? Is that what used to happen? Or is the man supposed to do that? I mean, how do these rules work in reality?
To be honest, it has nothing, I don't want to say nothing, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the 50s and the 60s, especially in our household. I enjoy the aesthetic, and I think that's where people get a little mixed up with my channel. But well, to answer your question, actually, I don't put the trash bins out. My husband does that, but I think we have this this thing in our household where he does most of the outdoor work. I do all the indoor work. Of course, he works and provides, and I'm the homemaker. that's what works for us. But
And in
I mean,
relation
hey,
to
I mean,
in
if
relation
your
to
wife-
what Pearl said.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like she's kind of also saying this, like that she kind of doesn't really think of it in this like 50s, 60s traditional way. It's just the aesthetic she likes. It's a good, it's an interesting point of view. I feel like this kind of is like the reality of this kind of social media, right? Like this is very aesthetics based, and it's kind of like, and it creates an image that you're thinking of, right? And it's not so much about the actual political aspects that the two other panelists are, I guess, somewhat fighting over, or we are discussing here. It's an image. Like it's kind of like, in a way, you're watching. It's difficult, right? Because it's like kind of this new form of reality TV, but like it's kind of very high production value, but people make their lives into it. So there's kind of a very strange blurring of these kind of lines, right? But it's probably more if you think of something like Boardwalk Empire or something like that, you know, like a TV show. That's more what's kind of happening here, and you have like this kind of understanding of that as an artistic product or as a media product. It's, I mean, there to give you entertainment for your time and money. I think this is probably like a much better way to think about it. So I enjoyed her point of view there. Oh, the other thing that I was thinking too when Piers Morgan was saying this about like, oh, I bring the bins out and my wife does other stuff or whatever, right? Or no, she brings the bins out, which I guess is like a it's surprising because the traditional gender role is that the man brings the bins out as one of the chores. I think like the problem is we're all talking about this like on a very personal level, but then there's actually like studies which shows that in like Western countries, and there's different studies depending on which country you're in, like women do a lot more domestic labor, unpaid labor, and even as they're working, right, like they still do way more of that. So like I'm especially care work and things like that. So if we look at these kind of things, there's just like the reality, which is like women work a lot more on average. Obviously you can find like examples where this is not the case, but they work more in terms of both paid labor in the economic market and domestic labor put together, right? So this is kind of like what we're talking about, the reality of it, and we're not kind of like acknowledging it, and we're kind of trying to make it cutesy about like, well, okay, so who's cooking, who's bringing the bins out, right? But it's no hard facts or whatever. Like if that's what I guess feminists are kind of talking about. It's like, well, if we had like a more equitable society, it would be like, then we could talk about this. Then like people would do unpaid labor and they would do paid labor and about the same. And like if they make a unit in a family, they would contribute more or less equally to it, or to, you know, or if they're Marxist, then they will contribute what they can, and the other person gets what they need out of it. But this is not really what's happening. Rather, we have a very gendered world in which men often do not very little on a domestic front, with exceptions, of course, and women are now often also doing things in the labor market, getting paid for this, but are still doing the domestic labor as well. And then like, you know, it cuts into like definitely their personal time, the free time, but also like into things like their sleep. And that's not to say that like things are going great for men. There's just like this one problem, which on a society-wide level, a statistic level, more affects women more or unequally. And that's really kind of like what we should be thinking about, should be addressing, and also see like what kind of solutions there are for this. And things like, so for example, what is like a kind of out of left field and doesn't really completely fix this, but like if you have like a 4-day work week, or like a 30 hour work week, things like that, like labor struggles, not that things are going in a great way in this, but if you have more time at home for your leisure and for like domestic tasks which are necessary to do, you might also be able to create like a better field for everyone to play in, and that necessarily won't fix like this man-woman divide, this gender divide, but it might help at least to alleviate some of the problems that, like, for example, women face with overwork, or also with like underutilization of their labor on the labor market, because if that kind of frees up time that that employers feel like they can put on, can give out, like maybe they will hire more women in like more equal roles. I will probably have to develop this point of a little bit more, and it's really a tangent. I might talk about this in a future video, but I was just thinking that we really kind of like, this is a way of to also think outside of the box, how to get like people not to be overworked and have more time for themselves and for what they need to do on a personal level.
Is part of that a sense of being dutiful and having no problem actually with being dutiful in a marriage?
Yes, I believe that traditionalism it is putting your family before yourself, and I think it is having those traditional values that were once definitely more in place in God, family, and love. And we live in a very selfish society now. You know, you see self-love printed everywhere, right? And women, speaking of divorce and marriage, women are leaving marriage far more easier than men, and they are doing it because they think there's something better out there for them, that the grass is greener on the other side, and they're finding out that is wrong, and they're going through divorce after divorce. And you know, marriage is a bond, and it's a sacred bond where two become one under God, and that's beautiful, and you have to protect that at all costs. And I think part of that is putting your partner's needs before your own every single day. And I try and do my best, and I think of my husband as much as I can and what will please him and make him happy.
I love the sound of.
Well, okay, so she comes, I guess, there from a bit of a Christian point of view, and kind of brings this into it. I'm not sure if her claim of like women going through divorce, and that being based on the grass is always greener on the other side, being like, I'm not sure if this is like the real reason for this. I mean, like we were discussing earlier, like when you don't have the option to really divorce, and then like you can't really compare this. Like the grass can be as green as you can possibly imagine, like really on the other side of the thing, and you just can't get there, right? Like you might be beaten every day, and you just can't get out of it, right? I mean, this is kind of like a thing that you really have to keep in mind when comparing these kind of idealistic view of it, like what you were saying, the aesthetic of it versus the reality of it. Right. The other thing is, like what I was saying, like mutual generosity, that kind of thing is very important, right? Like, and people should have this, and they should kind of like understand, like what am I giving, what can I give others, but what am I also like getting back, because it needs to be mutual, right? Like that's one of these questions. I mean, maybe she has like this great marriage where her partner gives back a lot, right? Something also that she's very, very happy with. Like you need to know what the situation is for you there. But if you constantly give but you're not getting anything, but you are in the situation where you're, for like religious reasons or for legal reasons, are not allowed to, or economic reasons, you're not allowed to leave, or you can't leave, it's like, this is not a good outcome for you, right? Like you give and you give, but you don't get back. It's not really fair, right? Like you're not fulfilled in this usually. Like some people might be, but it's I mean, it's probably, if you look into your own heart, it's not what you want for your life, right? You want people to also give back to you. And if you have that, that's great, right? And then like continuing your marriage is a great idea. But if this is not what's happening, if you're like being just sucked dry in a way, then perhaps you should leave. And it is better for you to leave. And there is actually greener grass out there. So you really just have to kind of see this and say like, well, this depends on the individual, and like making these kind of like really broad statements is probably not supported by what we can actually see, right? Like that people are just like, oh, there's going to only be better stuff, and that's why a divorce. I don't know. I mean, this is like actually a very negative view of humans, I think, generally. Like usually, I think people are trying to make the best decisions for themselves and the people they love, and then like the situation around them are what determines what that is, and what ability they actually have to make good decisions.
Sorry, I mean, obviously I don't. I wouldn't dare to express an opinion.
I think that's, a lovely way to think about relationships if it's reciprocal.
Yes.
You're talking about God and family and tradition.
This is the
Paul, can I please
women always
finish
keep
my
score.
sentence?
Life isn't about
I thought
keeping
women
score.
were supposed to, recognise their place and learn not to speak over other people. No, so look, I think it's reciprocated. You talked there about religion, about Christianity, and about self-love. The kind of most important commandment. There's two most important commandments: love your neighbour as yourself. So that requires a foundation of self-love and respect for oneself and knowledge of one's own identity and what one wants to be able to receive and give the love that you're going to have in a solid and healthy relationship. I think it has to be mutual.
You're not looking forward to getting you all back in about 10 years' time to see if either of you two are married and have stayed married, and to see particularly, Esther, if you're still married and still happily married and still feel exactly the same way you do today about what marriage should be. That would be a really interesting show.
All right, so I guess that's about that. I mean, Grace Blakely kind of made a similar point to me. Again, as you would expect, we come from, I guess, a similar ideology. But I mean, I think it was kind of interesting to try to talk through this. And yeah, I mean, I don't think the format is particularly good to watch by yourself. I don't know. I probably wouldn't recommend it. But it can be a good jumping off point. I mean, I'm later this week probably going to do one of those political tests, and it's also like I mostly use this as a jumping off point to develop some thoughts. Yeah, let me know if you like this. If you have other opinions, if you would like me to react to a different piece of content that you know. And except for that, stay spoopy.